Hello and welcome back to Explaining Acro. I'm Ben, and as you might be able to tell from the vision board and the affirmations, this is Cassandra's office. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is very important, serious, and kind of timely, frankly, which is safety in acrobatics. Now, the thing that really draws a lot of us towards acro is the sheer spectacle and difficulty of it. Making progress involves training near the edge of our abilities and mastering movements and positions that the average person simply cannot do safely. It's natural to want to share our accomplishments and to seek inspiration from others around us and on social media. It's easy to find examples of people doing things that might make you uncomfortable, such as doing advanced moves without spotters or on hard floors. That discomfort you might feel makes a lot of sense. Acrobatics is an inherently risky activity, and stories of serious and sometimes life-altering injuries are unfortunately readily available. It's easy to look at what we see others doing and imagine how we might feel in such a situation, and then give generic advice such as always use a spotter. While this impulse usually comes from a place of genuine concern, it unfortunately ignores a lot of nuance and can kind of trivialize safety. The goal of this video is to explore that nuance and provide a comprehensive framework for risk management that you can apply to your practice, whether you are training, performing, or simply watching other people. This video will not teach you how to spot or discuss specific safety techniques in depth. These topics are important. We've in fact done a video on spotting that'll be linked up here, and on all of our instructional content, we really like to emphasize safety and appropriate progressions. With all that said, let's jump in. So, like a waiver that you might sign before you're using a gym or some kind of training space, we need to start by acknowledging that there are risks inherent in acro and really any movement practice. Human bodies are fragile, and no physical activity is entirely risk-free. The best we can do is to mitigate and manage the risks that we do choose to take. To sum up our safety philosophy in a single sentence, it is this: that safety and risk management in acro is about establishing informed consent through communication, honest self-assessment, and activity modification. I think it can be helpful to start with a clear definition of informed consent. I think the one that I'm about to provide is pretty good, but please let me know in the comments if you disagree or if you have any points that you think might be helpful to add or modify. To start, I think it's useful to have a clear definition of informed consent. I think that this one is pretty good, but please let me know in the comments if you disagree or have any points that you might change or add. Establishing informed consent requires that all parties involved in what is about to happen are able to satisfy the following necessary but perhaps not exhaustive criteria. The first criteria is the capacity to provide consent. Things like drugs, alcohol, sleep deprivation, and even being in a heightened emotional state can prevent someone from being able to provide consent. Take a moment to assess whether any of these factors might be affecting you, and if you think you might participate anyway, I think you have a responsibility to let the other people involved know that you are in some kind of compromised state. It can be very helpful to, in a time when you are not engaged in acrobatic activities and of a sober mind, take some time and establish some ground rules for the conditions under which you will and will not be capable of providing consent or able to engage in acrobatics. This is very similar to drinking and driving, where a good strategy can be identifying that you're going to Uber beforehand, identifying a designated driver, or establish a number of rules such as if I've had one drink more than 2 hours ago, I'm good to drive. If I've had anything to drink in the last 30 minutes, I shouldn't drive, or whatever might make sense for your given situation. The second criteria is that of voluntary participation. So this really means that you feel comfortable saying no without fear of coercion or repercussion. It can be very common for there to be power imbalances due to differences in experience or perceived authority or perhaps some kind of relationship outside of acro. This isn't just with your acrobatic partner. This can also be with a space or an employer in the case of a contract. For example, there are unfortunately lots of accidents that have been reported in circus shows where performers have identified that, hey, like this surface is slippery, or I can't see the safe, and their concerns are kind of brushed aside, and they feel compelled to participate anyway because their livelihood depends on it. So if you feel like you can't speak up and you can't say no, then it's a really shitty situation, and the criteria of voluntary participation frankly doesn't exist. As individuals participating in it, I think it's important to repeat it to each other. But as performers, it can be a really difficult situation. And this is honestly where having some savings and a good relationship with the various stage managers and production folks is important. Because if you feel like your job is at risk, or if you feel like you're being forced to choose between your job and your safety, it's not a good situation. The next criteria is activity comprehension. This means that everyone needs to know what specific skill or sequence is going to happen, how can it go wrong, what you're going to do if it goes wrong, how are we exiting the skill, that's part of the skill or the sequence. And finally, everyone involved needs to be okay with all of these things. They need to be capable of providing consent, be participating voluntarily, understand what's going on, and then given all of those things, say, yes, I actually want to do this. I understand that in practice, you're not going to take a screenshot here, print it out, and have an in-depth discussion about every point on this list every time you do a skill. Understanding the context in which the skill is happening is important, but it's important to err on the side of caution with some of these things, particularly when working with new people or with new skills. At a bare minimum, there should always be some acknowledgement of what is about to happen by everyone involved in the skill itself. So I'm a fan of, if we're about to do a trick, so say back tuck recatch, I would say back tuck recatch, the flyer would confirm back tuck recatch, rather than just say yup or something like that. That prevents wires from getting crossed, and it can really help. Now that we understand the criteria of informed consent, we can talk about the really common situation where something has been proposed and one or more people involved is not fully on board with it yet before proceeding. Now, it's important to remember that a person has the right to say no at any time, right? This was the criteria of voluntary participation. Without the ability to say no, the concept of consent is now meaningless. A consequence of this is that someone may not want to participate for any reason and under any circumstances, and no modification will make them want to participate, and that is okay. Now, assuming that's not the case, we can start to talk about how we can use our feedback framework of self-assessment, communication, and activity modification in order to arrive at something that everyone is okay with. It comes down to a few different categories of objections that people might have, and there certainly are more that are not on this list. First thing to talk about is just skill comprehension, right? I don't understand this skill. So you can try and explaining skills in a different way, maybe look at a video, break it down to something simpler, and then maybe do this with a heavy spot, using some mats. If it's a dynamic move, can you kind of walk through it? Something like that. The second thing that might come up, and this is something that sometimes people just don't want to comment on, is the current physical abilities of everyone involved in the skill. Technique matters a lot, but at the end of the day, certain physical attributes are required for certain skills. There might be a certain amount of strength or body control that's required, and it might not be there today. And that's okay. Sometimes you can get around this by working with an assistive spotter. Sometimes you just need to hit the gym, come back later, or work with a different partner. Not every skill works in every partnership at that time. It's important to, balance an acknowledgement of reality with a growth mindset. And this doesn't apply to just bass and flyer. I am, believe it or not, 5'6". And this means that there are a lot of skills that I do not feel comfortable spotting. If someone is 6 feet tall and doing their first hand-to-hand with a 180-pound dude, I want no part of that. I can't reach the skill. If this starts falling, I'm going to get hurt, and I'm not confident that I can keep the flyer safe. So that group should be comfortable saying, hey, I don't want you spotting this skill, go get someone else. And me as a spotter especially should be saying, dog, I want no part of this, find someone else. And that's okay. And when you're working without a spotter, I have the physical abilities to do this, but maybe there's this way that we could possibly fall that I can't control. And this is something that happens with me a lot. So I work with a good number of flyers, and on skills like pitches, there's certain types of exits where it might not be safe with every flyer. So I want to, for the first couple that we do, maybe get a spotter or have some mats in a place so that if a skill is falling in a certain way, I can, push the flyer to the mat, push the flyer to the spotter, and I don't have to either risk injuring my body or risk injuring the flyer. So have these conversations, understand what you can and can't do in the moment, figure out if you can accommodate for it either with spotters or mats or things like that, or if you just want to try something else, try it with someone else, come back stronger, something like that. As you start working with a partner more and more, you develop a shared experience, shared vocabulary, you understand what each other need for different skills and things like that. If a random person comes up and says, hey, like, want to do a one arm or whatever, it's like, okay, let's do like a hand-to-hand first. Identify an appropriate progression. Let's do some things first, get to know each other a little bit before we start throwing really complicated skills. And kind of the flip side of the current physical abilities too is like, as a flyer, it's like, I think I trust you, but like, I don't know what's going to happen in this skill. I might twist in some way. Can we use some spotters, mats, lines, some specific safety techniques to alleviate the concerns that I might have with this skill. We've talked about consent and some ways that we can do activity modification in order to establish consent. Now let's apply that to some common situations that we might encounter. When you're working with someone new, it's a really good idea to limit the assumptions that you make. Just because you do things a certain way doesn't mean that they can. Just because they look super strong doesn't mean they can hold you without dropping or do a handstand or whatever. It's a good idea to have conversations about what capabilities you have, what are you comfortable with, and things like that. Past that, it's a good idea to start with some kind of handshake. Now, in this context, a handshake is a safe common skill that both people feel like that they can do comfortably, and that even if things go terribly wrong, they are confident that they can make sure that they exit the skill safely. So as a flyer, that means, okay, like I'm going to do the hand-to-hand. No matter what the base does, I feel like I can twist out and land on my feet. Whereas the base, it's like, okay, I'm doing like this bird or this side star or whatever. And even if the flyer starts doing some crazy stuff, I can like pull them into myself, hug them, and get them to the ground safely. Just might be bird on feet or like some kind of L-basing move. But you want it to be something where you both feel comfortable that no matter what, you're going to come out of it safely. And from there, you can start to layer things on and build a more advanced practice together. It's important not to get complacent. Just because you have this shared vocabulary and feel somewhat comfortable together, that something new might require more time or supportive equipment or situations that you might not be used to. And even things that you're comfortable with, like things can change. You might not have trained in a while. Like it's okay to like take a step back, re-establish some comfort, and then come back to it. Now I would like to talk about a group of content that I'm calling exhibitional/artistic content. For me, this would be anything that you might post on Instagram or a circus show that you might attend. In these scenarios, I think that everything still applies to the people directly involved in the skills that we already discussed, so informed consent. However, I don't think that there is necessarily an obligation to communicate the risks, progressions, and safety precautions taken to the audience of the content. This point, I think, is a little bit controversial. To Steelman, the opposing case, I think this is kind of the classic, mimicry effect, if you will. You see someone doing something, so you're like, oh, cool, I'm going to try that. But I believe that there is at least some burden of individual responsibility to contextualize the things that you're seeing and then do them or not. Where this crosses the line, I think, is in instructional content. So there's all of these like partner challenge videos that you might see on Instagram, tag your partner to try this or whatever. And in those cases, I think that there is more of a moral obligation in order to communicate the relevant risks and the appropriate progressions and spotting techniques. I think that a lot of content that this channel puts out falls under this category, and that we do have a responsibility to communicate the relevant risks, safety precautions, and progressions. And really, that's kind of what I had prepared for you. So safety is really about conversations, making sure that people are there of their own volition, they understand what is going on, and that there's this dialogue that's happening in order to incrementally make people happier and happier to the point where people feel okay doing the things that they want to do. In the context of these common situations that we might encounter, we've talked about how we might apply that to a partnership, either a new partnership or an existing partnership, and some guidelines for like how to think about how this might apply to social media. I know that this is a hot button topic, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the comment section down below. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, and as always, please subscribe to the channel for more free content in the future.